So our next speaker is one of the co-founders of Project Future. She was recently awarded a fellowship in global priorities by the Forethought Foundation, and her current research focus is on articulating and evaluating long-termism. Welcome up on stage, Signe Saven.
Okay, so hi everyone. It's great to be here. The focus of this talk is going to be to discuss what we can do to try to ensure that the far future goes well by representing future generations into Swedish policymaking. So, I will begin by saying something about why we should care about the far future. I will not go into very much detail because Aron Wallinder had a great talk about long-termism yesterday. So if you didn't see that, check out the recording later. Then I will briefly speak about what we can do to try to ensure that the far future goes well. So I will speak about Project Future, an organization that EA Sweden initiated about a year and a half ago. And I will share some suggestions for how the interests of future generations can be represented in policymaking. And lastly, I'll mention what people who are interested in advancing the cause can do to help out. So, I believe that one should care about the far future, because the far future has an enormous potential for value. The future is astronomically long, which means that it has the potential to be filled with astronomical amounts of value. And we don't have to settle on a certain moral theory to agree that caring about the far future is important. On aggregative and impersonal theories, such as total utilitarianism, the claim that the future is important might be most obvious. But one does not have to value happiness, well-being, or preference for fulfillment to conclude that how the future goes is important. Valuing other things, such as knowledge, beauty, civilizational or technological progress, artistic achievement, or virtues, is consistent with recognizing the huge importance of the far future. So roughly, one needs only to value something which has the potential to be realized in the future. And as Ben Todd puts this, the idea that the future matters a lot just rests on the belief that if something is valuable, it is better to have more of the valuable thing rather than less. And since the future is so long, it is possible to have much more of the valuable something in the future. And I find this belief highly plausible, at least regarding most things that have final value. And when I say that something has final value, I mean that it is good or bad for its own sake, not for the sake of something else. For example, as an instrument to receive a certain goal. It is not certain that the future will be all things considered good. Hopefully it will be, but it might be the case that the future will have a negative value. This could happen, for example, if an existential catastrophe occurred and left most sentient beings in a state of suffering. A belief that the future will be bad should not make us care any less about the future. On the contrary, perhaps it should make us care even more about the future, because it might be more important to prevent suffering or negative things from happening than promoting good things. So all in all, I believe that we have a strong reason to care about the far future and act to ensure that the future goes well. But how can we go about to achieve this? So one way to try to ensure that the future goes well is to focus on future generations and their interests and use this approach to work towards a more long-term perspective in politics. So I think that this approach has several advantages. Firstly, it likely captures a large part of what affects the value of the far future. Whether future generations exist. If so, the number of generations and the number of individuals in each generation, as well as the quality of life of these individuals, are likely to be a large part of what determines the value of the future. Secondly, I believe that most people share the intuition that future generations matter, and this helps this approach to be more tractable. I think that many people care about future generations for the sake of the individuals in these generations, wanting them to live good lives and believing that it is valuable that they do. I also believe that many people think that future generations have instrumental value in the sense that the existence of future generations confers value to what we in the current generation do, to our projects and our achievements. Much of what we do, such as striving to find more knowledge, creating art, searching for cures to different diseases, developing technologies to improve living conditions, fighting for social change, and similar endeavors, seem to lose much of its value if we were the last generation to live. And I think there's something really beautiful to this, that we through different projects seem to be striving towards creating something better for generations to come. Thirdly, this approach is concrete and fairly effective in terms of its scale. There are many things that can be done to help future generations and the future in general, but a focus on adapting policymaking to better incorporate the interests of future generations provides a concrete way of improving the future. And further, because of the wide-ranging effects of implementing new laws and other types of policies, this course of actions could have major effects and provide a basis for long-term influence. So because this approach seems to capture a large part of that which is part of determining the value of the future, seems to be quite tractable, and seems to have the possibility to have a large impact, I believe that it is one of the best ways to ensure that the future goes well. But this raises the question of how we can go about to make politics more focused on future generations. This is the question that Project Future aims to answer. So Project Future is an organization which aims to protect the interests of future generations by introducing a more long-term perspective in Swedish politics. The establishment of Project Future was initiated by EA Sweden's General Secretary at the time, Marcus Anderljung, and the first meeting was held a little over a year ago, in the beginning of March. Project Future is currently supported by EA grants and led by Denise, who has also been part of the organizing team for this amazing EAGx event. We still receive support from EA Sweden, mainly in terms of the time its General Secretary, Gabriella Overöder, spends on doing work to advance the project. And we've been really lucky to have a great team of volunteers, such as Robert Shepard, Emil Vastason, and Thomas Ahlström, who have all dedicated their knowledge, skills, and other resources to help work towards advancing our goals. So at the start of the project, we had a fairly intense research phase. We explored what initiatives had been taken in Sweden so far to take on a more long-term perspective in politics. We considered what had been done in other countries to represent future generations in their respective political systems. And we discussed which initiatives we thought would be best to try to implement in the Swedish political system. So our aim was to create a system that would safeguard the interests of future generations, as well as possible, by producing and implementing beneficial policy. So to achieve this, we found it crucial that we would be able to set up a system that would continue to exist, and that it would succeed in producing and implementing policies, and that these policies would be really beneficial, preferably to as large an extent as possible. So this led us to adopt certain criteria to evaluate a system by and the different parts of the system. And these were achievability, sustainability, and effectiveness. And in order for the system to work effectively, we concluded that it would be crucial for it to have access to necessary resources, such as relevant research of good quality. If not, it would be really hard for it to lead to beneficial policy. After talking to different people to get their input on the matter, considering initiatives from different countries and proposals from the literature, we ended up with a list of 5 suggestions for how the interests of future generations could be better incorporated into Swedish policymaking. This list was published as part of an opinion piece in one of Sweden's largest newspapers, so some of you might have seen it already. So our first proposal was measures to implement the new Swedish climate law and to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. For instance, by establishing a Commission for the Future to oversee this type of work. This scores relatively highly on achievability because the climate law and the Sustainable Development Goals are already in place, which shows that there is some commitment to them. The second suggestion that we had was to establish an ombudsperson for future generations. Sweden has a strong tradition of ombudspersons. For example, a few decades ago, an ombudsperson for children was set up as part of a process that gave the interests of children increased consideration. And like children, future generations lack the opportunity to look out for their own interests. So having an institution doing it for them helps make sure that their interests are considered to a greater extent. So our suggestion is that this ombudsperson would oversee what the parliament, the government, and the different authorities do in their work to incorporate the interests of future generations. And in addition, the role of the ombudsperson would be to propose new legislation to protect and promote the interests of future generations. And though perhaps not so easy to establish, an ombudsperson scores highly on sustainability. Some of the ombudspersons in Sweden have existed for over a century. Our third proposal was to set up an all-party parliamentary group, similar to the one that was established in the UK in the fall of 2017. And this is our current focus, so I will speak more about this later. This suggestion scores fairly highly on both achievability and sustainability. The fourth proposal was to create an increased focus on future generations throughout the entire legislative process. In the investigation leading up to the proposal of a new law, we believe that one aspect to consider should be what the effects of the new law are on future generations, and that this same aspect should be considered by the committee that reviews the law before it is voted on in Parliament. And depending on how this is regulated, it would be more or less achievable and more or less sustainable. For instance, if regulated by law, it would be harder to put in place, but also more likely to be longer lasting. So finally, the fifth proposal was more of a call to civil society to make demands on politicians in general and support those politicians who take future issues seriously and want to implement changes to create a better future. In order to create sustainable change, this broad societal support is needed. So moving on to our focus now. At the moment, we don't have all the resources to pursue each of these suggestions fully. So as of now, our priority is to establish an all-party parliamentary group, or APPG for short, for future generations. I believe that this is a good starting point for several reasons. Firstly, establishing this group scores relatively lowly on achievability, which means that we have the resources that are needed to be able to achieve this. And secondly, having established this group will likely help us to advance our other suggestions. Having a network of dedicated politicians working together to create a better future for generations to come likely increases the possibility that an ombudsperson for future generations will be established and that a greater consideration of future generations will be taken throughout the entire legislative process. And thirdly, since an APPG has recently been established in the UK, this provides us with opportunity to learn from their work and to be more efficient in our work. We believe that it is important that the APPG has members from a broad base of political parties to increase the likelihood of good future policy being adopted and that the group stays operational for a long time. Many of the future issues that we face are complex, and to be able to address them adequately, continuity is crucial. There has been some initiatives in the Swedish parliament and government to take a more long-term perspective in policymaking, but many of these initiatives have been short-lived. For instance, in 2011, the government created Framtidskommissionen, which roughly translates to the Future Commission. It was made up of the party leaders in government, and the commission presented its final report in 2013. That is only 2 years later. And this report was criticized for focusing on diagnosing challenges without offering solutions to them. After the 2014 elections, the government appointed a Minister for Strategic and Future Issues in Nordic Cooperation, or Minister for the Future in short. And this minister was responsible for an investigation called Uppdrag Framtid, roughly Mission Future, from 2015 to 2016. So that is just a year. And when the government was reorganized in May 2016, the position as Minister for the Future was removed from government. And initiatives that last for 1 or 2 years only are insufficient. So an APPG with representatives from all parties in parliament would be better placed to carry out initiatives that last for a longer period of time. Our plan is to host the first meeting of the APPG later this spring. We've been in contact with members from different political parties, and we have found a group of parliamentarians that are interested in becoming part of the network. Though getting the APPG going is our top priority at this point, we also spend time trying to raise the general public's awareness of these issues. Last year, we published a couple of opinion pieces in Swedish newspapers. So apart from the one representing our suggestions, we published one about autonomous lethal weapons, where we urged Swedish parliamentarians to vote for a ban of these weapons. And we've also held a few events, such as a seminar in Almedalen during the political week in July, and a debate between members of different youth parties before the election, focusing on politics for the future. Because we believe that support from civil society is important to create lasting change, we believe that it is important to continue this part of our work as well. So we are planning to host a debate between candidates for the European Parliament before the election, again focusing on future issues. So if that aligns with your interest, keep a lookout for that. Further, an investigation titled Inquiry to the Consequences of a Swedish Accession to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons has recently been completed. And as is common procedure, when an investigation of this type is completed, it is possible to make comments, which we plan to do, as a large-scale nuclear war is a major existential risk and something which would have a high impact on future generations. And we will be in Almedalen again this year, so if any of you are there, it would be real nice to chat with you. So to conclude this talk, I just want to say something brief about what you can do to help out to advance the interests of future generations in Swedish politics. So I've divided these suggestions into 3 different categories, depending on how much time they require. So they are roughly 5 minutes, 2 to 20 hours, and 4 hours a week. So if you have about 5 minutes to spare, we would really appreciate it if you took the time to follow us on Twitter. We just recently set up an account, and we need more followers than the few we currently have. So just go to Twitter and search for Projekt Framtid, that is the Swedish version of our name, and you'll find us. And if you have access to internet right now, it would be really great if you could do it. Also, please go to our website, projektframtid.nu, again, Swedish version of the name, to sign our open letter in which we push for the list of suggestions I previously mentioned. Again, if possible, it would be really great if you would do it now. And also, we're looking for tips regarding parliamentarians and researchers that we should reach out to regarding this. So if you have any tips regarding that, please send an email to our project leader, Denise at denise@effectivealtruism.org. If you have a bit more time, say roughly 2 to 20 hours available, again, please send an email to Denise. introducing yourself, your skills, and the kind of work that you're interested in. There are concrete tasks that are not too time-consuming that would really benefit from having more resources being spent on them. And currently, we are especially interested to come into contact with people who have experience with politics, lobbying, and communications. Other skills, such as social skills and writing skills, are also appreciated for tasks such as carrying out different events and writing articles and opinion pieces. And if you have even more time and are interested in becoming a member of our project group, please again just send an email to Denise, just introducing your skills and yourself and your interests in the project. And our project group meets Monday evenings at Norrsken House in Stockholm and/or online to discuss different questions relating to the project and also carrying out work together. So we'd really love to come into contact with dedicated people who are interested in helping advance this cause. So thank you so much for listening to this talk.